So basically, we released the draft general plan for public review on December 1st. Right now, we're accepting comments from the public, and that window for public comment on the first draft is closing towards the end of this month. We have had 2 work sessions with the planning board so far, just to go start talking. Well, the first one we talked about the whole process leading up to the general plan, kind of a general overview. Last Thursday, we went into detail on a couple chapters, and then we're going to have another work session in the beginning of February, hopefully to kind of wrap up on the details. From there, after we close public comment, then the department will be reviewing all of the commentary and updating the draft accordingly, so that we can go ahead and file what we would consider to be like the council's version. So it would be the DPZ final version for council consideration, understanding that more changes along the way. And so we have prepared, let me take a step back. We are looking to take that council version, the one, the DPZ final, to the planning board in March, and pre-file that thereafter. And so we have provided a schedule to the council with some work session dates or meeting dates or whatever you want to call them, about 7 of them through the months through March through June, to have various work sessions about different chapters of the plan. Ultimately, our goal would be to have an adopted plan before the council breaks into recess in August here. So understanding the budget, unfortunately, falls kind of in the middle of everything. We've structured it so that some of the work sessions could occur prior to the budget, and then we could pick back after the budget is adopted. Happy to get into details on any one of those components, but that's kind of it.
Sure. I guess just one last question to begin the foundation piece. When I look at some of the code requirements that the general plan will trigger in that process, I'm trying to make sure that we have enough time to complete all of these things. So for example, within 1 year of passing the general plan, our code requires an Apfo committee to meet and determine their recommendations. Would you be able to provide sort of just general time estimates for how long these processes take? How long should we be looking out for the time it will take for the Apfo committee, and how, just generally speaking, how long does a comprehensive zoning process or a code rewrite take, so that way we can make sure that we're budgeting in these times to help us make sure that we're not going too far out with our general plan and then losing that time in the future, potentially?
Sure, absolutely. So with respect to Apfo, the code is very specific in that a task or a review committee, the code calls it, has to be convened in 1 year from enactment of the general plan. And then in 1 year of their first meeting, they shall submit a report to the county executive and the county. So at the longest, that process would take a maximum of 2 years at its longest. So that's a little more straightforward because those deadlines are code managed. The comp zoning is a little bit harder to anticipate because kind of looking back at the last comp zoning, it was pretty straightforward in that there weren't many new districts coming online. There weren't changes to the code regulations. It really was just some tweaks to get in compliance with Plan Howard 2030, and then also to allow the members of property owners to propose text amendments and map amendments. And so that process took a year, October 12 to August of 2013. But keeping in mind that that year was purely procedural steps. There wasn't any engagement like is typical for all of our planning initiatives nowadays. That was just straightforward procedural steps. So putting out a request for text map amendments, processing a large volume of applications for those amendments, and then basically just moving forward with public noticing, planning board hearings, and then nowadays we operate much differently. We're not drafting in a vacuum. We're proposing drafts, we're bringing them to the public, allowing for public comment, we're revising drafts. We go obviously back and forth through the last couple planning boards. So I would expect that just based on the processes, how long it can take. I mean, the public engagement process is the most time that I would expect the comp zone or more along the magnitude of like years. Also, this general plan is much different, structured differently than Plan Howard 2030. So probably going to be looking at new zoning districts. We're going to be looking at cleaning up the code and reorganizing the code and making it user friendly, like what was suggested in the development regulation assessment that Clarion conducted in 2018. Have to consider the character areas and then potentially character zoning for some of those areas. We're going to need to add definitions. So there's going to be a number of changes associated with this comp zoning that I think is going to warrant additional time. And then I'll just throw on top of that, we're also going to be doing the Gateway Master Plan concurrently with those review efforts. So while we do expect to be able to do all of them concurrently, as in we don't need to wait to finish one to start another, we are going to have to kind of stagger the timelines for each of them so that we're able to juggle the project.
Thank you. That's helpful to hear, and I think gives a good provides additional context for the decisions that we need to make. In the draft schedule of work sessions that was sent to the council, one of the things that I'd sort of wrestled with was whether or not, in the proposal originally sent by DPZ, they thought it would be wise to have sort of a session 2.1 and session 2.2 of supporting infrastructure, managing growth, and dynamic neighborhoods, because those are some of the meatiest. I thought it might be beneficial to withhold dynamic neighborhoods until we go through supporting infrastructure, managing growth, quality by design, to ground dynamic neighborhoods in that context. So when we get to dynamic neighborhoods, we've already gone through managing growth and we know our infrastructure and our design quality. However, when you look with the budget break, that means that we'd be picking up dynamic neighborhoods after all those things. So some of the feedback I heard from council members is that it might be preferable to stay with the original proposal and have some of the more meaty topics in the beginning for us to begin those discussions. But I wanted to make sure that council members have an opportunity to ask questions of Director Gowan and that we're all on the same page with the tasks we have to accomplish. So I'd like to open it up to the council. Ms. Walsh?
There's no requirement that this council proceeds with all of those steps, though, that Director Gowan mapped out, right?
I would say that the APFO is more required because it's required, but there's a code requirement. But
yes, I understood that. But I'm
yes.
saying, I understand the year thing, but there's nothing that says that those follow-on activities, whether concurrent or in serial, is accomplished within whatever 4 minus how many days have passed since we were sworn in. I think that's an artificial backstop that in large part exists because of a decision in last term to defer this exercise until now. So I know we're having that conversation later on in the administrative meeting, but as the five of us are part-time, no one else in this room is, and no one else who sent us that schedule is, and I've communicated this to the council administrator, to propose a schedule that immediately surrounds the most grueling 6 weeks of our year, in a way that I think is disjointed. Like you're enmeshed in this subject matter, then you cease it entirely, immerse yourself in something different, and then resurface and go back. I don't think that's probably the best approach. I'm less concerned about the order and more about dedicating the time and attention we should be to an obviously important subject matter.
Sure. I think I wanted to make sure that people had the overall context, because if we, and again, like, I think we should focus on our decisions here as this body, because where we are today is where we are today. That if we delay the general plan, that we are potentially closing other doors. And I know that this is something that if we're creating the general plan, which I often refer to as a menu, Mr. Youngman came with the phrase that it's not even a menu, it's just saying this is an Italian restaurant, not even getting into the specifics of the menu within the general plan. So knowing, just having a basis of how much time each thing takes, each responsibility before us, that if we delay the general plan, then we may be closing the door for these other opportunities. We may run out the clock and run out of time and opportunity to do that within this term. And that's all that I really want to make sure that people are aware of, because in theory, we create this vision and then we want to make sure we can achieve the vision, and we can't achieve it without doing the comprehensive rezoning to actually achieve what the general plan sets out to do. So, Ms. Young?
We had an administrative meeting where unanimously we agreed not to start the general plan process until after our budget process. And I know we're going to talk about it again, but that's where I still stand for the reasons that Ms. Walsh brought up. I'm not concerned about whether or not we'll have time. I think in the next 4 years, we will have time to get through everything.
Right. Mr. Youngman?
I think that, I don't really mind either way. I think we're looking at the schedule as potentially having like 3 sessions before budget. To the extent we could knock a few sessions out and give DPZ or whoever a chance to do whatever research, ask questions, things that came up, it might save us time. I'm less concerned about that as I am with doing the bulk of the work in June and July and thinking we're going to finish before August recess. I think no matter when we start, even if we knock out a few work sessions before budget, to think we're going to finish by the end of July is ambitious. And I just went into this term assuming that everything you and Director Gowan listed out, through code rewrite, through comp zoning, through map, through text, through APFO, was probably going to dominate the bulk of our existence for the next 4 years. So I'm not sure trying to save 2 months is save 2 months either by starting early or save 2 months by trying to tackle it all during June and July is something that we need to try to load on ourselves. I still don't, while I don't object to the schedule, I also don't object to this not passing until October or whatever month that might be.
Well, I would consider it more than just 2 months, because if we don't start until after budget, then you're really losing about half a year. And then you also have to add in August, so you lose, you have to include that piece of it as well.
And again, I'm
And again,
okay
I'm
adding a
just-
few of those before budget. You know, it gives everybody a chance to at least figure out where we're coming from on a few things. I'm more concerned with that
Thank
back
you.
end, but I'll stop there.
Dr. Jones?
Yes, thank you. So I remember discussion. I remember us talking about having some sessions before and some sessions after. Then we said, well, no, let's keep it all together because it would keep our minds fresh on what. But it was then when we heard from the administration about the time frame and the concerns. And so now we're having a discussion about reevaluating it with their advice, if you will, or notion that it may help. So I'm not against adding sessions back in before budget. Either way we do it, I think it's really about when we're going to finish. And I think if we put a pin on when we're going to finish, it allows us to backtrack and be extremely efficient and orderly about the time we spend in session. I mean, you know, being chair last year, it was a challenge, but it was times where we just had to just stop talking, go offline and emails and our own research because we just can't sit here in an infinite space of talking. Right? So I think if we know this is our drop dead date and we step back all the way to February or tomorrow, January 10th, we'll say, okay, this is what we need to do. This is how many weeks, how many hours, how many sessions, how many minutes. This is when we're going to stop talking. This is what we do. I think if we do that as a body, we'll be fine whenever we want to finish. I think if we go into it saying, oh, I don't know if we're going to have enough time. Oh, it may spill over until next year. That's just not an efficient and orderly way to step forward. So whether we have sessions before, whether we keep it all after budget, doesn't matter to me. It's about the order and efficiency so we know when we're done.
And like budget, we know when we have to be done.
Yeah, I think
And we
that's a
work
great,
backwards from there. So, yeah, he's right.
I absolutely agree, Dr. Jones. Am I hearing any suggestions from the body? If we put a final date of the first July session, then we would have us doing the 3 before and then the 4 after budget.
I would strongly recommend that we not do the one in April because literally that's the week that we get our.
We get the operating budget
get
that
the
week, but we
operating
won't
budget that week,
have,
yeah,
we
and-
won't have any auditor feedback from then. We will have most of our capital, which I feel like because, again, thank you to the budget office, there's less of a, our first year, the out years were more wish listy, and we're getting a little bit tighter this year with the capital budget. So I would anticipate that the capital budget portion should be more simple than the operating, and we will have received operating, but not had additional analysis performed beyond our own.
Right, but I think that we all want to focus on that, and we don't want to be focusing on at least what I consider one of the most important parts of this entire grand plan, the ecological health and the environment. I think that we should save that for when we really have the opportunity to focus on it.
Right, Dr. Jones?
Yeah, I really think this is one of those times where, with respect to just our personal lives, family, legislative sessions, bills we may, write, sponsor, things of that nature, this is one of those times where we will have to juggle several things. I do think, so for instance, if Director Gowan or someone says, okay, I know what I want to talk about this, I can spend 2 hours talking about this, and we can spend 2 hours receiving it, whether that happens in February or March, we take copious notes and just, store it away, save it somewhere, and then bring it up again in June. I don't think that that's a bad thing, which will help us get finished by our end date. Trying to operate in series and have things like, stop here, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. I don't think that's going to be efficient. We're just going to have to just juggle several things. And we're just going to have to get it done. I think that's what our voters expect of us. I think that's what we should do as a body.
Do we think, if we're talking, I think it's a good place to start talking about the end dates because that can take us all forward. So
Is this the administrative meeting?
It is not scheduled for an administrative meeting.
No.
Okay, so this is that
Yes.
discussion we're having
Yes.
now.
Yes. So if we looked to July 26th as the date to vote, and then we had to have everything complete by then, is there a majority of the body willing to work towards that July 26th date? Or do we need to, that's the question. Is there a majority of the body working towards the 26th? Mr. Youngman?
I talked to you last week, and I talked to Director Gowan last week, and I'm still stuck on, and again, to reiterate what Dr. Jones says, like, let's work backwards from when we want to be done.
Right.
I just don't know what the magic of the end of July is. I really don't. And like, even the schedule that I looked at showed when amendments were going to be due, and then some public hearing, I guess, that's after amendments. But am I wrong that I know there's been all this opportunity for public input, but that the public doesn't want to provide us their input even before we do amendments? I mean, is there really only one public hearing on the general plan to the county council?
There should be more than one.
Okay, I must have just missed those then.
Or could be wrong.
You know,
about
they're
it.
going to be in June, they're going to be in July. It's just, I don't know why we're so focused on this end of July thing, except for the fact that there is those litany of other things to do after that. But even those don't really have a particular deadline of when they need to be done.
Yeah, I'm looking from like end of term, and then 2 years of comp zoning, also having the Gateway Master Plan, and also 2 years of APFO. And while we can potentially stagger and get through multiple things, I'm worried that we'll still run up. Here we are talking about doing two things at once, the budget and general plan, and we're saying we can't.
Well, why do those
Do
things
them.
need to, I mean, why is comp zoning going to take that long? Why is APFO going to take that long? I think the thing you didn't say that is going to add more time in is this code rewrite. And are we even trying to get back to the code rewrite and get it done during this term? And that would run out our clock. But I
Well,
don't
you'd
know
have to
what-
do that after comp zoning.
Right. But I mean,
So
has comp
you
zone
can
ever
add that
taken
to the
2
end
years
of-
before?
But I think Director Gowan went through
Yes.
that. I mean, the notes that I have for APFO taking 2 years are that you have to stand up the committee within a year. So say a year of voting on the general plan. So you can't start it until after we vote on the general plan. So that pushes it out. And then the committee has to return the report 1 year from their first meeting. So then you have a year from that starting line. And
Well,
that's all code required.
Why don't we just make it that they need to report to us 6 months or 8 months after their first meeting? I mean, unless they are going to Montgomery County and going to these other places around the country and finding a whole new mousetrap that's going to replace APFO, and like, unless that's what they're going to try to accomplish, which seems like a lot for kind of a citizen board, I mean, what are they really going to do over an entire year?
I mean,
And
my
we're going
hope,
to come down with the same debate that we have, is what the school percentage should be and what the road test should be. And I don't know why we would need to give them that long. So it's not just when do we have to have the general plan done, it's when do we want to have all these things done, I guess.
Right.
Or all those timeframes fixed.
right, that's the context I'm trying to ground this conversation in, is what we have ahead of us. And to be very honest, I do hope they are looking at those things. I hope they're not just looking at percentages. I hope they're looking at weighting, 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 by unit type. We know that certain units generate more children to the school system than other types. There's an opportunity for creativity. We don't have to, keep the status quo and just make small updates. We can really be creative in how we solve these issues, and solve two issues at once, not just solve the issue of school overcrowding, but also solve the issue of housing shortages for workforce housing and paraeducators and things like that. So I would hope that we would have a fulsome APFO committee that has these issues tackled. So I think that it should be taking more time. Ms. Walsh or Dr. Jones, do you have opinions on that?
I guess in mapping out the next 4 years, I kind of set aside a year in my head for each of these activities. If you went back and looked at, recall that even to begin the general plan, this council had to approve the methodology and the timeline. No one ever thought we weren't going to get this thing, and as late as we did. So I'm very uncomfortable on us as a body making up for however much delay already pre-exists our receiving it. And so again, in my oversimplified form, if we spend a year on this exercise, we allow some portion of a year for the APFO, then that still leaves 2 years for the follow-on activities if we're insistent that that all falls on us. But yeah, the July break is, I would not be pleased with that.
Okay.
Going back to your original question.
Thank you. And I would also presume that this means that if we don't complete it by July, then that will make whatever legislative efforts the body may want to do in the fall would also be complicated by picking up and dealing with the general plan at that time as well. So I just want to make sure there's these considerations as we're talking through what we're looking at accomplishing over this year and the next 4 years. So if July seems untenable to a majority of the council, and obviously I wouldn't suggest September because we have the August recess in which we're not supposed to be having meetings, we're not supposed to be having public hearings.
Are we allowed to? Or are we officially recessed, like shut down?
People are giving us looks.
There's allowed to, and there's
know.
there's the vibes I'm feeling in this room now.
I think
Mr.
if
Cook
we
online
gave
or-
ourselves 2 extra months, I'd be very open to having a couple sessions before budget. I'd be open to having sessions in June and July, but I do think that we're going to not get it done by the end of July, and that we should be targeting like October.
In October, the end of October.
You know, and just to take the pressure off of June and July.
And in June and July, a lot of
Yeah.
people are on vacation, and if
Yeah.
that would give us an opportunity to bring everything back, as well as people who were interested in testifying in September and October, and hopefully give the public an opportunity to feel that they've been heard. And I think that is as important as getting through the work.
And we've got a lot of county staff that's going to want to be on vacation
Yeah.
through the end of June into July.
Okay. And also, again, part of this context is that when the decision, actually, I'll just not. But what I will say is that there have been requests to speed up, slow down, delay, move forward, return, and it's challenging to accommodate all those requests as they change over time. Director Gowan, if you can touch on, I guess the last piece of concern I have is just the lack of, I guess we're sort of losing momentum in that we've asked, if we delayed, if the council delays, then we're requesting public comment, stopping, and then there would be a period of a lack of engagement with the public. Do you foresee any issues with that, Director Gowan, in terms of participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was important to us was to keep the momentum going because, you have the public engaged. We are still continuing to have discussions with the public. We're doing an open house tomorrow that is centered on the equity lens that the general plan has embedded, and we're meeting with various boards and commissions upon request, and so kind of out there actively engaging. The public is tuned in. It does seem at this point in time, and it is important when you're undergoing a massive planning effort to continue that momentum. You don't want to have a lull, and we've also been discussing, an adoption process that's to come with the public. So I think that was part of our proposal was, to continue to move this forward means, pre-filing it after the planning board. Our intent was to pre-file it in March and to start having those more in-depth conversations with the council, knowing that there would be a lengthy process with the council to go through the entirety of the adoption. A piece of it too is, a bill only has a certain life span. And so, we do need to, part of that July deadline was factoring in the amount of time that, we could have those discussions on on the bill that will be before the council. And if I could, I just want to mention in terms of AFO, I did look, and that task force met 22 times over 10 months, the last effort. So I think that, any meeting of that task force is going to require a number of meetings. Also would point out that the general plan has clear direction for the task force and is to look at models that are used in other jurisdictions within the United States and Maryland that account for infill and redevelopment, as opposed to kind of a greenfield development approach. And so the general plan, and it's in the managing growth chapter on page 16, identifies different areas for data and analysis that we think that the task force should do. So I do see that taking a good deal of time. I think EZ will assist with whatever analysis they need during that time, but I definitely don't think that's something that could get done in 6 months. I would also, one last thing would point out was, like, even after the report was submitted, there was still, I think, another year before legislation was filed. So then there still needs to be some subsequent legislation after that. I don't know if that answered some of your questions.
More food for thought.
I just go back. I think that there's a lot of places in all of those other projects to find 3 months to shorten something if we want to give ourselves till October instead of July to finish the general plan.
Do you mean October 2nd or November 6th?
Depends if we're working in August, I think. I'm looking to give us 2 extra work months. Now, if you guys are like, oh, that's crazy.
That would be November 6th.
Yeah. But if even the folks that are leaning the same way of, hey, we need a little more time, think that 4 extra weeks instead of 8 extra weeks is okay, I'm not going to argue. But
I would say we don't want to put the date as the final November because you don't want to push it into December and then die in that way. I would say you want to make sure that November 6th would be the latest you could possibly go with it, because if there were things that caused it to be needed an additional table, but you would want to make sure it had the life baked in.
yeah, why don't we assume,
It's December 4th.
why don't we shoot for the legislative session of October as our voting date, so that way if something slips, we're into legislative session November, but
Okay.
not risking December and not trying to do July.
That gives you just September, because the voting session for October would be October 2nd.
Yeah, we're picking up one more month of official work, but I do think that if we're still gathering our thoughts, trying to talk to people, I mean, we all still have the freedom to be working on this and clarifying our thoughts in October, in August, don't we?
We might want September for some more public hearings, and then maybe work sessions among ourselves. I mean, all of these work sessions that are set up right now are work sessions that are set up by DPZ. We might want our own work sessions where we sit down and talk about various things, and we have our own questions that we would like to explore as a body, and maybe get members of the public who we consider experts in to talk at some of those work sessions.
So you mean sessions for the council to deliberate, not to consult with subject matter experts? Just so I know when
The
I'm.
type of work sessions that we hold generally on legislation are our own work sessions, where we get a piece of after we get a piece of legislation, we hold a public hearing, and generally, we hold a public hearing after we get a piece of legislation, and then determine whether or not we want to have a work session. Well, at some point, we right now have we have one or two public hearings, but by the time we're finished with all these work sessions that DPZ is putting on, there might be a need for more public hearings so that people can comment on what the information was that DPZ gave us.
So just to give some clarity about where I asked DPZ to make a proposal of how to organize the work sessions, so that way we could tackle the content, because, you know, they've obviously been shepherding this process, and so I think they have a good handle on the best way to outline the information, consume it, discuss it, deliberate it. So that was why I asked for their input on putting together this proposal. So these should be, I wanted to do it in conjunction with the subject matter experts to make sure that, you know, we talked through who would be there. That's why on the proposal you have, you know, who those subject matter experts are to be invited to those work sessions. So that way we can, you know, similar to a regular piece of legislation, because the general plan is an ordinance. It is a piece of, it is something that we will vote on.
So then, are you saying that if we as council members would like additional people to participate in those work sessions beyond the people who DPZ have identified, just as we have been doing for the last 4 years, that we can invite other people to participate in those work sessions as well? Is that what you're saying? We're not going to
Yes.
have separate ones.
Right, I'd say ideally, if we're having a conversation about quality by design and the focus areas, that whoever you think would be, as a subject matter expert, would be beneficial to have in that meeting, asking questions of the council, then you would want to make sure that they were invited to the quality by design and focus areas.
Okay, that wasn't my understanding when I saw this schedule. I
Yes.
thought that the schedule was just DPZ, which actually I would then argue that we definitely need more time, because we would want the people who we would hope to invite to these work sessions to be as up to speed as possible too, so they can be helpful to us in the work session and not just testify.
Yes.
Because I think
No.
that's important, yes. So,
Can you help me understand what additional things they would need to be prepared? If we're having the public comment session and by the 23rd, what additional time do you think these subject matter experts need to be prepared for these? I mean, these meetings are right now.
Some of us, I mean, I don't know, you may not want to invite anybody, but, you know, if I wanted to invite some people on a particular chapter, I would want the opportunity to sit down, talk to them, help understand what it was that they were going to bring to the council members, talk about, you know, whatever issues DPZ is putting forth. I would want time to sit down and talk to people that I would want to invite to a work session. And that could take scheduling, it could take preparation on my behalf. So I'm
trying to understand the
saying is,
timeline and the
I am
challenges within
suggesting
it.
that we try and shoot for the end of October. I just think it would put less pressure on us. And I think that given the delay by the executive branch over the last 4 years, that there's no reason for us to rush through this and feel like we have to make up for that time. We could have gotten this done in 2 terms.
Well, you
And I
did send
still
a
think-
letter requesting it be sped back up, and now they're trying to, we've been installed, we're trying to get through it, and now you're asking for a delay. So,
Not a delay,
more time. Yeah,
okay.
That's
Yeah.
a big difference.
that is a big difference.
Big
Okay.
difference.
Ms. Walsh, I hear that you feel there is a big difference in that.
I must have done what Ms. Young did, which was misunderstand this, what is it called, proposed schedule. I'm not sure who it is who can explain to me, can you put this into context of whenever DPZ pre-files this legislation, then we have this series of work sessions, but no public hearing? And when is the input for the public hearing? And then what is the amendment timeline? Like, I can't imagine this is a fall amendments 3 days before the vote on it kind of scenario. And what kind of volume of amendments are we expecting? You know, like, can you put this schedule, this proposal into the bigger context of how it fits in our legislative framework and when those opportunities for public input are and how we're addressing amendments as they come in?
Sure. So at the very bottom, it gives a month.
I was asking.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Ms. Harrod, go for it.
Okay, I'm just looking, so they're proposing to pre-file for April, correct, which would be on March 23rd? Is that correct? So then it would follow the legislative schedule. So unless we have additional public hearings, April legislation would be introduced on April 3rd. There would be a public hearing, which would include the legislation for the general plan on the 17th of April. The amendment pre-file would be on the 27th. And that is if the legislation is not tabled. If the legislation is tabled, then the subsequent months for public hearing for amendment pre-file could contain any legislation that is currently still active. So if you were to table this, this April legislation, if you were to table it, then you would have an opportunity as well in the subsequent months. April legislation could be tabled and extended twice, which would get you through to August, and that would be our wrap-up session on July 27th. So you would have the opportunities in April, May, and June, as well as July, to add in this legislative item into your public hearing or work sessions.
Oh, okay, so as long as it's live before the council, the public has the ability to come in and testify about it during each of those months' ordinary course public hearings?
Should the council add it to those public hearings, yes.
I think it would be preferable that we make it, that we have the April one, but then we have other clear and marked ones like this Monday, July 17th, but then also we can schedule additional public hearings because I would imagine there is going to be a need for additional public hearings prior to, so like we're having work sessions on the chapters, but then we would also have work sessions after the amendments to have discussions on those, and we would also be having additional public hearings to hear people's feedback on the draft, on what's been filed, and some of the discussions within.
Okay, so how many public hearings were there last time around? And how many amendments were there last time around?
I'd have to look real quick. I thought there
Because
were
I feel like we're
extensive
kind of treating that
amendments.
as an afterthought, and that is probably the biggest ask of our time. Not sitting here receiving information from this subject matter experts and whoever else we can cajole into coming into a work session, but actually receiving and possibly acting upon whatever further public input may be provided, whether at some scheduled public hearing or otherwise, and then working with council staff to draft and ideally garner support for some number of apparently exceeding 100 amendments. So I'm not sure where in, you know, that I see these notes at the bottom of the thing, the proposal that we have about a June 29 amendment pre-file, Monday, July 17th council public hearing. I want to make sure that we have eyes wide open in terms of what those individual tasks among, you know, in context will also require of us.
I agree. I think the thought was that the subject matter expert discussions would help inform what our amendments were. So that was the thought process in having the work sessions to go through the items and then have those inform and have an informed discussion among the body, and then that would inform what our amendments are. And then we would have those amendment discussions as well and work session.
But the subject matter experts who presented this proposal and would be coming to us in work session, this is their draft, right? So will they be proposing a large number of amendments to their own draft?
No, but I would think that we would ask questions of the experts that would then inform the amendments that we would put forth. I would think that we would want that grounded in a discussion and in data and in the research. So I was sort of looking at it as we'd have these discussions, we would get into it more than just if people had questions about the PSA extension, why or why not? I mean, that's come up with the public, at least in my discussions with them a lot, and getting to have that discussion about why, where, how we ended up in a essentially low growth scenario like our general plan is. I think having those discussions that then lead to our amendments is ideal. In 2012, it looks like they just tabled it once. But, oh no, it was over 100 with amendments to amendments, but it was 39 amendments. And then with the amendments to amendments, that's what made it up. But that is sort of where I was grounding this in that we have these discussions with the data, and then that informs our amendments as a body and those discussions.
Okay, so this schedule proposal, this is from Department of Planning and Zoning, or this is from the chair?
It is from the Department of Planning and Zoning, and then I changed a few things because I asked for their original proposal to just bring it to a discussion for the body, because I want to make sure that we are all prepared and understanding the larger context and the immediate context. So then we'll have, that's why I wanted to have this discussion, because I don't want to get too far down in looking at these July dates if that's not going to be possible for the body. So I mean, they did one public hearing last time, but I would imagine that we need to. We've obviously had, this is the most public engagement a general plan's ever had in Howard County. I would be surprised if we didn't have a need for another public hearing, but I could be wrong. Ms. Harrod?
Just for contents as well, I heard there was a desire to maybe push this out. The next opportunities for pre-file for the general plan, if you were wanting to push this out to
Yeah, if we
September,
voted on
October.
October 2nd, if we gave it all the extensions, or if we left one extension possible on that October, when would it need to be filed?
If you pre-file for July, which would be June 22nd, the final extension would push it past the November 6th vote. That's with 2 extensions. You could vote on that in the beginning of October with 1 extension. Pushing it to the next pre-file would have to be September, which would then not be introduced until August 24th, and that would push it through January of '24.
But if we wanted to be able to, Mr. Youngman?
Ms. Gowan and I talked about this the other day, is what we're kind of looking for, I think, is to maybe get started on this, have some work sessions, drop it for the budget, not be stressed through the summer. And, we're looking for a longer life cycle of a normal piece of legislation. Could we have some of these work sessions, or call them presentations, in the next couple months without the legislation having been pre-filed? And we'll just not call them work sessions.
The
we'll call them
council certainly could
presentations.
have call work sessions for whatever topic they
I think there's a
choose.
mix of what I'm hearing. Some folks want to, do some of the work prior to budget. Some folks want that work to be in the summer.
I'm just trying to figure out what our options are. And if we did go ahead and file the legislation earlier, at the end of the day, what they'd have to do is they'd have to refile the legislation. But if we do want to do some work before budget, and we do want to give ourselves for October, I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I think there's a way for us to figure out how to extend the deadline, either by not filing it right away or refiling it. Yeah, I just don't want us to put ourselves in another box that we don't need to put ourselves in. That's all.
Correct. You can schedule, the council can call themselves into a work session. The other thing is, Gary Cook did respond back. The only code requirement or charter requirement is that the council cannot meet for legislative session in August. But if you choose to have other types of non-legislative meetings in August, you could do that as well.
All right. Ms. Walsh?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Cook. I was going to say I'm happy to provide Director Gowan some pro tips on refiling legislation whose time has lapsed in the ordinary cycle. But I also wanted to make clear, I'm not saying I want only, not to do it in summer or whatever was just said. I would like us to have more time over what period that is reasonably accomplished. I don't want us to try and get this done in the 6 weeks following a budget cycle. As much time, as is being said, I don't even mind having it start before budget, but to have it come right up to budget day start one and then resume right after budget day end so that we can meet some artificial deadline is the thing I'm concerned about. I would much rather have us pace it in a more reasonable way over a number of months than I think that we reasonably could take in order to accomplish that task. So, I'm assuming some of us is going to have a conflict one way or the other on some date or not, but that always happens. But you're going to have a higher hit rate of conflicts if we're doing it all in 6 weeks versus 6 months.
All right, that was helpful.
I have one last clarification. It may be helpful to get some direction for the scheduling purposes on what the council is expecting, like how many times a month would you like to dedicate towards the general plan? On the calendars that have been proposed, we're meeting like at least once a week. Do you want to only do 2 sessions a month? And then how many public hearings? And then I can work with the chair to work through that schedule.
I don't mind meeting once a week. But one might be a public hearing, might be a work session, one might be, I don't want to meet once. I don't want to have one work session a week plus load in the public hearings, plus then we're devoting 6 or 7 days a month to the general plan. I think that's excessive.
And make sure you're factoring in your regular legislation with that as well.
Well, I think that everyone, and I'm sorry, but everyone is going to have to take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit on regular legislation if we expect to get this done this year.
Mr.
Ms.
Yeoman,
Budget.
please recall where the volume of our legislation comes from. It's not this
I know,
body.
I know we've had this conversation.
But we will still
And you
have
know
to
what?
do leases. We're still going to have to do.
But those aren't time consuming.
I'm
The administration shouldn't be
just
sending us
encouraging
any
awareness.
reinvent something either. I mean, I think if we all really, both branches want to stay committed to getting this general plan done, and I mean, other pieces of legislation require staff time too, and DPZ's time, and DILT's time, and everybody's time. And if we're trying to get this done and we're trying to stay focused on it, let's all just try to stay focused on it. I'm going to say one last thing, and I'm not going to talk anymore. This is just the general plan, though. Okay, I don't know that these amendments and a lot of the things that do need to be done to get the general plan done are going to be like the text amendments and rewriting subdivision code and those sorts of things where you really are debating the last word here and there, right? These are higher level concepts, and while I was the first one to argue for more time, I'm not convinced that that the amendments are going to be incredibly complicated. I think they might be plentiful, but not complicated. So, for what it's worth, it's kind of that Italian restaurant thing that you started with. So, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Any other final comments on this proposal? Dr. Jones?
Yes, just briefly, if we could just consider a mix of daytime and evening meetings with our increase in meetings. I'll do my best to juggle, work and kids and family obligations to be here for the body and for the public. But if we could have a mix, that'll be great.
I think it's a great suggestion. Any others?